Hi, I'm Dr. Arlen Hill, and at times, we've all struggled with fatigue. But what do you do when that fatigue seems to be unrelenting, when it seems to be persistent day in and day out? Now, we've all, again, had fatigue. We've woke up in the mornings and felt like we just really wanted to stay in bed, or we've had the mid-afternoon lull in energy. Those are common, those things happen. But what do you do and where do you look when fatigue seems to just be persistent? It seems to occur day in and day out, and nothing you're trying seems to improve the situation. Well, I want to share some insight with you today, and I thought what I would do is not talk scripted, just talk off the cuff. Just share with you things that I've observed over the last 20 years of practice and things that I've seen to become beneficial for patients or to be beneficial for patients. So let me give you a couple of ideas of where you should be thinking and just maybe some ideas of where to look. Now, understanding that fatigue can be a bit of a frustrating topic because many individuals, when they bring fatigue up to their healthcare provider, are often, the topic is just sort of pushed aside. At worst, there's often the recommendation for an antidepressant. That's not favorable for anyone, so we don't need to think in that direction. There's real concrete causes. It's not all in your head. You're not just imagining why your energy levels have declined. There's things that we can do, things that we can actually definitively point to as to what's causing your fatigue. So let me just start and just go through a few things that come to mind for me. In my mind, one of the things that's bar none at the top of the list are nutrient deficiencies. And they're at the top of the list because, quite frankly, nutrient deficiencies are extremely common. Most individuals have nutrient deficiencies, in fact, and most individuals have nutrient deficiencies that can be directly tied to energy production. When you probably think about taking fatigue into your own hands, many individuals will look for a supplement as a potential intervention. They'll grab some B12 or maybe some other B vitamin complex. But the reality is that these often don't provide much resolution, if any at all. And the reason is that because there's so many other nutrients that come into play when we start to talk about energy production. Energy is a very complex process. It's a multi-step process, and there's a lot of opportunities for things to go wrong. There's a lot of opportunity for nutrient deficiencies to impact that. So when we start talking about applying nutrients to resolving fatigue, we really need to have a pinpoint way of doing that. And that's why I would encourage that looking at lab tests and isolating what your individual needs are really is the best way to go about doing that. Now, just as an example, many individuals would not consider zinc to be a primary nutrient that they're going to reach for when they start to address fatigue, but zinc is very much related to energy production and can be used to help overcome fatigue. So I would say that absolutely has to be at the top of the list, but by no means the only thing that we should be thinking about. Another situation that we should, or another area we should think about as it relates to fatigue is going to be our gastrointestinal tract. Now, it may seem like a bit of a stretch to connect our gastrointestinal tract to energy production, but interestingly enough, the two are very, very directly related with each other. How so, you may ask? Well, it all has to do with the bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract, oftentimes what we think about as our probiotics. Now, these organisms, we just tend to think about these organisms as taking up space in the GI tract, but nothing could be further from the truth about that. These organisms are our own workforce, and they do a lot of things for us. So if we don't have them on board every day, if they're not working to their fullest capacity, we're missing out on a lot of things, such as all of our B vitamins, vitamin K, beneficial fatty acids like conjugated linoleic acid that help reduce inflammation. These are all derived from the bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract. But that's not all. They also produce compounds that support our neurological function. Many times when we think about the neurochemicals in the body, what are often discussed as neurotransmitters, we think about these as being unique to the brain, to the central nervous system. That's not the case. In fact, the majority of the neurotransmitters in the body are produced in the gastrointestinal tract. These have such names as acetylcholine, dopamine. These are responsible for our brain speed. If you've ever associated brain fog with fatigue, you just can't get your thoughts together, or maybe you can't get those words out right. That's acetylcholine coming to mind. That's dopamine coming into the picture as a potential problem. These are associated with motivation. If that motivation feels like it's lacking, what it hasn't been in the past, that's a primary cause of fatigue. So that needs to be dealt with. And that means addressing the output, the production from the gastrointestinal tract. So that's just another area. What else comes to mind for me here? Well, hormones come to mind. Now, we think about hormones, we may think about the thyroid hormone, we may think about hormones like cortisol and DHEA, and even testosterone and estrogen. Here's what this all boils down to. None of these hormones act in isolation. They all serve a role as it relates to your energy production. So when we look at a hormone, just repleting a hormone is a bit of a quick fix with some potential complications that may arise from that. We need to take a broader perspective. You should think more systemically about your hormones and how they all interrelate. Insulin interacts with testosterone, and cortisol and growth hormone comes into play. These are all variables that we need to be thinking about. What else comes to mind here? Well, how about sleep? Are you getting good sleep? Are you restless through the night? Is it difficult to fall asleep? Do you wake up? Do you feel refreshed when you get up in the morning? If you're scratching your head as I'm asking these questions and you're thinking, well, no, I'm not ideal with that, you should really start to address your sleep. We need the right amount of sleep. We need the right amount of sleep at the right time. It's important that we get restful sleep. Our body needs time to recover, to regenerate itself, so that when we do wake up the next morning, we can function at a high level. That's not going to happen if you don't have adequate, consistent sleep and a routine that you've become, or that has become integrated into your lifestyle. A couple of other things come to mind for me on this. What about infections? Infections, we've all been sick. Do you feel energetic when you're sick, or do you feel lethargic and worn out? Of course, it's the latter. Infections don't necessarily just come as acute infections. We can have chronic infections that linger around in our systems. And the more those infections linger around, the more resources our immune system has to divert away from our feeling good throughout the day. We're diverting those resources to the immune system cells so they can deal with the infection that's present in front of them. Maybe that's a bacteria, maybe it's a fungus, maybe it's a virus, maybe it's even a parasite. Regardless of what type of microbe we're talking about here, the bottom line is that we're using energy resources that should be directed towards our well-being. We're using those instead to deal with an infection and challenging our immune system. And keep in mind, when we talk about the immune system and activating the immune system, that doesn't come without inflammation. And inflammation is a troublesome issue. Yes, it's beneficial on some level, but we need to keep it under control. And it's this uncontrolled inflammation that really is a huge detriment to your energy every day. You see, what happens is that as this energy, or as this inflammation accumulates and it begins to zap your energy, literally what it's doing is it's destroying the cells in the body. It's destroying the energy production centers for the cells in the body. And these energy production centers are numerous. We need lots of these working in each individual cell to have adequate energy production every day. We don't generate ATP, our energy molecule, efficiently if we don't have multiple of these what are known as mitochondria working per cell. But here's the kicker. When you have a lot of inflammation occurring, you're literally reducing the number of mitochondria per cell. So instead of working with a full load of mitochondria, now you're down to 3/4 or a half or even less. And that means that when you put the right nutrients back in, when you shut the inflammation down, you're still left with too few mitochondria. And that means that even when they're working at their fullest capacity, you may not be getting adequate amounts of ATP, your energy molecule, to feel your best. But rest easy, there are things that you can do to increase your number of mitochondria per cell. Last thing I'll present to you is that we live in a toxic world. And listen, if you don't think toxicity is playing a role in your health, if you don't think it's burdening your health and increasing your risk for chronic disease, you're quite frankly fooling yourself. There are multiple pieces of evidence that suggest that our world is becoming more and more toxic. But you can do something about that. You can control your environment locally around you. You can make good decisions about the foods that you're consuming and derive those from local farmers, from clean sources that are not using chemicals in the foods that they're producing. And equally, you can bolster your own detoxification systems. This is not a theory, this is science. Our body has detoxification systems. We use nutrients to support those systems. When we have deficiencies in those nutrients, those detox pathways, they don't function optimally and we accumulate toxicity. And with that accumulation of toxicity becomes inflammation, becomes hormonal derangement, becomes damage to the gastrointestinal tract, leads to other nutrient deficiencies. You see how all these things begin to play off of each other. So it's important to understand, as I've laid out multiple causes of fatigue, it's important to understand that the reality is that your cause of fatigue probably is more causes of fatigue, not singular, but plural, multiple. But you can do something about that. Take a direct approach to dealing with your fatigue and understand that the causes are real. You just need to hone in and isolate what those are. And that's something that's very achievable with looking at lab testing. Having objective information that you can definitively point to tell you where your efforts need to be directed at. I've presented a lot of information to you on this, and by no means is this all the information that we could talk about here as it relates to fatigue, but I do think it's important information to share because I think it's important to allow you to have a starting point to be able to work with. So with that being said, if I can do anything to help, please let me know. I'm interested in supporting you and helping you uncover what your sources of fatigue are, and also find what your best days ahead are, find out how you can live a more optimal life and how you can have better health. So with that being said, I want to thank you for taking the time to invest in your health simply by listening to this information to give you something additional to think about. I'm Dr. Arland Hill. Thank you again.